This podcast contains descriptions of violence against children and adult language and is not suitable for all audiences. Listener discretion is advised. Hi everyone, and welcome to Suffer the Little Children, the true crime podcast giving voices back to the victims of child abuse and shining a harsh spotlight on the parents, guardians, and caretakers who silence them. I'm your host, Lane, and this is episode 66, Megan Bomford, Part 1. On October 18, 2016, when the news emerged of a fatal single-car crash on McKnight Boulevard, the community of Calgary, Alberta came together in grief and horror to mourn the death of 17-year-old Megan Bomford and to pray for the recovery of her father, Shaun, and her best friend, Kelsey, who were also in the vehicle. Shaun received much less sympathy when it was revealed that his blood alcohol was 3 times the legal limit, and almost a year later, he received criminal charges for the crash that took his daughter's life and nearly ended Kelsey's. You might wonder what a drunk driving incident has to do with child abuse, and that would be fair. Every news account of Megan's death paints it as an anomaly, a single incident of alcohol-skewed judgment on the part of her father. What no news outlet dared report on was the years of psychological abuse Megan endured at the hands of her father and how that relationship culminated in the untimely death of a teenager. In today's episode, I'll tell you the story of a vibrant, funny young lady who was loved by everyone who came in contact with her. In next week's episode, you'll hear my interview with Megan's mom, Lisa, and sister, Sarah, who paint a dark picture of a family life filled with alcoholism, abuse, and Shaun's escalating erratic behavior leading up to Megan's death. This is part 1 of the devastating story of Megan Bomford. My sources for this episode were the Calgary Herald, CTV News Calgary, CBC News, the Calgary Sun, McInnes and Holloway Funeral Homes, Wikipedia, Global News, Facebook, the Canadian Legal Information Institute, and Megan's mom and sister, Lisa and Sarah. I'd like to take a moment to thank my newest patrons, Nicole from Michigan, Sylvia from Katy, Texas, and Shannon from Central Coast, New South Wales, Australia. Thank you all so much for your monthly pledges. I so appreciate all of my patrons. If you'd like to help support the show and get me closer to my goal of permanently devoting myself full-time to the podcast, you can visit patreon.com/stlcpod. Again, thank you all. Now, about today's episode. On the surface, this story may seem different than most of the stories I tell. Most of the kids I talk about on the podcast lost their lives due to acute or prolonged physical abuse at the hands of a parent or caregiver. While most people familiar with this case consider it simply a drunk driving accident that caused the tragic death of a teenager, as soon as I learned about Megan's story, I knew I had to tell her story here, and this is why. I can't stress enough how important it is to me, personally, to spread awareness that domestic abuse does not always include physical violence. An abuser can cause just as much damage by emotionally manipulating his victims, belittling them, making them doubt their sanity, isolating them from friends and family, and a million other psychological tactics. These people are highly skilled at breaking their victims down, destroying their sense of self-worth, and leaving them irreparably damaged. The abuser's actions almost invariably escalate to the point where something has to break or someone gets hurt. And in this case, a father's escalating hostility toward his own daughter led to an event so catastrophic that countless lives have been changed forever as a result. Michael Shaun Bomford was born in 1965 in the province of Manitoba, where he lived until his family moved to Calgary, Alberta. After graduating from high school in 1983, Shaun worked as a musician, playing guitar and keyboard in a number of bands that performed across Western Canada and in the United States. In 1995, Shaun met his future wife, Lisa, who had lived in the Yukon Territory since 1989 after her parents divorced and her mother remarried. Lisa was intrigued by Shaun's charisma, intelligence, and musical talent. She was particularly impressed by Shaun's obvious adoration for his nephew, which led her to believe he was a kind, loving man who was devoted to his family and would someday make a wonderful father. Shaun and Lisa carried on a long-distance relationship for a few months before Lisa traveled to Calgary and stayed. In 1996, the couple married, and in 1997, their first daughter, Sarah, was born. 2 years later, on July 26, 1999, they welcomed their second daughter, Megan Bomford. All throughout her life, Megan was involved in ringette, which is a sport that originated in Canada in 1963, when ice hockey wasn't as popular among girls. Ringette is played on an ice rink, and the players wear ice skates, protective pads, and helmets, and use a straight stick with no blade to pass and shoot a rubber ring. Unlike hockey, there's no intentional physical contact, so it's inherently a less violent sport, although there are obviously a lot of parallels between the two sports. It might be fair to say that ringette was a huge part of Megan's life. On social media, someone asked Megan, "What is the meaning of life in one word?" Her response was, "ringette." Megan was an excellent player, literally one of the best in Alberta, if not the entire country, and despite the years she spent playing, she never lost interest in her sport. She proudly wore jersey number 6 on the ice, and she was known for wearing pink gloves while she played. Girls on other teams feared facing down the girl with the pink gloves, and Megan was the primary goal scorer for her team, the Calgary Under-19 Northwest Grit, as well as every other team she'd ever been a part of. Megan was as fierce on the ice as she was off. In 2016, Megan was a tall, slim, gorgeous 17-year-old with long chestnut brown hair and exotic-looking brown eyes. She was a bright, vivacious girl with a fantastic sense of humor who cherished every moment spent with her circle of close friends, many of whom were fellow ringette players. Megan attended Crescent Heights High School in the Crescent Heights neighborhood, which is located directly across the Bow River from downtown Calgary. She loved ringette so much that she and her best friend since the age of 5, 16-year-old Kelsey Nelson, wanted to become junior coaches. On Tuesday, October 18, 2016, Megan arranged for her father, 51-year-old Shaun, to drive her and Kelsey to the Calgary Police West Winds campus, where they would get background checks as part of the process required by the Ringette League. Megan's father was heavily involved in Megan's ringette participation. For many years, he coached Megan's teams. On Ask FM, a social networking site where users ask each other questions, someone asked, "Is your dad really serious about your ringette?" To which Megan replied, "Obviously you haven't met my dad. He's literally more serious about my ringette than any other thing in my life, but I'm glad he's so serious about it, to be honest. It made me appreciate the sport and love the sport way more than I would have if he hadn't really cared at all. He took me skating when I was 2 and 3, and by the time I was 4, I was already playing ringette. He always made sure that if I was hurt, I took care of my injury so that I wouldn't have to miss any ringette. He always coached all my teams, and he's the reason I'm where I am today. He always pushed me really hard and made sure I was always pushing myself to my full potential and challenging myself. So yeah, he's really serious about it, and sometimes it's annoying because he always picks on me and yells at me, but I know if he wasn't serious, I wouldn't be where I am today." On the afternoon of October 18th, Shaun picked up his daughter at the home Megan and Sarah shared with their mother, Lisa. Shaun and Lisa had divorced a few years earlier and shared custody of their daughters. After picking up Megan, Shaun stopped to get Kelsey. During the ride to the police station, Kelsey was in the back seat while Megan sat in the passenger seat, where the seat belt did not function properly, a problem Shaun was aware of but hadn't yet taken the time to have fixed. At around 4:50 p.m., a dark blue 2002 Jeep Liberty traveling west in the 5600 block of McKnight Boulevard was seen driving erratically, weaving in and out of traffic and far exceeding the speed limit of 80 kilometers per hour, which equals about 50 miles per hour. Multiple witnesses described the vehicle as driving much faster than the surrounding traffic, which one witness described as a slow-moving wall of other westbound vehicles. The Jeep was traveling at 112 kilometers per hour when its passenger side tires drifted off the pavement into the gutter, causing the Jeep to fishtail in the right lane and triggering the driver to overcorrect, veering sharply left. The Jeep slalomed across multiple lanes of traffic into the left lane, back into the right lane, and then sharply into the left lane again, where it entered the grassy median on a 45-degree angle. The vehicle evidently hit a rut, causing it to launch into the air, violently rolling several times across the median and the eastbound lanes, and ejecting all 3 of its occupants before coming to a stop, right side up, on the far bank. The roof of the Jeep was crushed in at the back, and the eastbound side of McKnight Boulevard was covered with debris, pieces of blue plastic, and shards of safety glass, as most of the Jeep's windows had exploded during the rollover. Multiple witnesses called 911 and stopped to help, many of whom were, fortunately, medically trained. First responders who arrived minutes later came upon a gruesome, horrific scene and immediately set to work tending to the severely injured victims. Initially, an EMT working on Shaun, who was unresponsive and lying on the grassy embankment, detected no pulse and, thinking the man was dead, covered him with a blanket. Moments later, another first responder noticed Shaun was breathing, and life-saving efforts were resumed. McKnight Boulevard was closed to traffic between 52nd Street and 68th Street for several hours into the night. All three of the Jeep's occupants were loaded into waiting ambulances and transported to Foothills Medical Center, where Shaun and Kelsey arrived in critical condition. Tragically, Megan, who had suffered catastrophic head trauma in addition to many other injuries, was pronounced dead. The young woman who, just minutes before, radiated vitality and good humor, who had plans for her future, who had years of life yet to live, was gone. At the hospital, EMTs reported that while rendering aid to Shaun in the ambulance, they noticed the smell of alcohol emanating from the man, so his blood was drawn for analysis at 5:34 p.m., more than 40 minutes after the collision. The results that eventually returned were stunning. Shaun's blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit of 0.08. That evening, Global News spoke with one of the witnesses who rendered aid to the crash victims. Jan Ginther, an emergency room nurse from Red Deer, Alberta, and her husband, Kurt, a volunteer firefighter from Innisfail, were traveling eastbound when the Jeep rolled across the road only a few car lengths ahead of them, so they stopped immediately and rushed to provide assistance.
We saw an SUV kind of swerve over on the other lane, and he just came across the meridian, and it rolled numerous times. I sat with the one girl, my husband was sitting with the man. She was having a difficult time breathing, and I did a jaw thrust on her, held her and told her she was loved and that somebody would be here soon.
Calgary police investigating the incident told reporters that speed and alcohol were the potential factors being investigated. Sergeant Dave Dentant told the Global News it was a stroke of luck that no one else was injured.
It's very lucky that there weren't any other vehicles going eastbound at the time on McKnight, because then you would have looked at multiple vehicles and more people being injured.
The morning after the crash, the Calgary Board of Education sent grief counselors to Crescent Heights High School to support both students and faculty members. The students were informed of Megan's death at 9:05 a.m. The atmosphere in the school that day was thick with grief as countless tearful students embraced each other in the hallways and classrooms. Late on the afternoon of Wednesday, October 19th, Megan's mother, Lisa, released a statement reading, "Our beloved Megan was tragically taken from our lives at too young of an age. With so much ahead of her, we are all grieving that we will no longer get to share graduation, birthdays, weddings, and other things she was looking forward to. She was such a feisty, generous, and loving girl who has a love for all things ringette. The loss of our dear, sweet Megan has ripped a hole in the heart of our family and an entire community. She was always a firecracker and lived life on her terms. She had a soft spot for any furry animals and always wanted to adopt any she found. She loved her friends and ringette more than anything else, and I know all the ringette communities are in pain right now. Please remember Megan for everything she left on this earth the short time she was here. Her love, compassion, trying to find the longest "yeah, boy," her impressive Snapchat streaks, eating breakfast at Denny's with friends, roasting friends and family at dinner, and being the most amazing young woman and daughter. Please remember my daughter for the amazing person she was, which you can see all around, rather than focusing on the tragic circumstances of this accident. Megan's favorite movie was Peter Pan. She's in Neverland now." Megan's cousin, Becky Driver, who called Megan her best friend, said, "It is like a nightmare I can't wake up from. There will never be another person who can fill that empty space she has left in my heart. I already miss her more than words can describe. I would give anything just to see her and hug her one more time." In the area, countless hockey and ringette teams grieved Megan's loss and prayed for Kelsey and Shaun's recovery, taking moments of silence on the ice before commencing their games. The football team from Megan's high school mourned her loss at a game on Wednesday evening by linking arms with the opposing team for a moment of silence. Shortly after learning of Megan's death, some of Lisa's friends and colleagues created a GoFundMe campaign to assist the grieving mother with funeral costs. Megan's funeral was held on Monday, October 24, 2016, at McInnes and Holloway Chapel of the Bells. Attendees were asked to wear hockey jerseys or bright colors in honor of Megan. Megan was cremated, her ashes given to her family. Both Kelsey and Shaun remained in the hospital for several weeks after the crash. For both, it was touch and go for a while, as doctors were unsure if either would survive. Kelsey had suffered an unimaginable list of injuries. The crash broke her neck, her back, and all of her facial bones, ruptured both of her eardrums, punctured one of her lungs, caused damage to her knee and ACL, and left a permanent brain injury that impacted her cognitive skills, ability to solve problems, memory, and language. She underwent 3 brain surgeries in total, and a 1-inch piece of her skull had to be permanently removed on either side of her head. Despite her severe impairments, Kelsey worked incredibly hard on her recovery and was released from the hospital after 63 days, just in time to be home for Christmas. Shaun was in a coma for 3 months, but he was hospitalized for a total of 5 as he underwent multiple surgeries to repair fractures to his ribs, neck, spine, pelvis, and legs. When Shaun was released from the hospital in March of 2017, he made a rather tone-deaf Facebook post that, in my opinion, reveals a lot about who he is. So obviously I was in a major crash and was pretty much foobar for a while. I'm able to hobble around now with crutches. Notice how the post kicked off by talking about himself? If he had any regrets about killing his daughter with his own recklessness, or worse, let alone losing her at all, he certainly didn't show it. You'd think he would lead with that. In the months after Megan's death, her family and friends, the Ringette community, and many others in the Calgary area mourned the loss of her bright spirit, while Kelsey continued working on her recovery, all the while learning to live without her best friend, who she called her other half. In January, Kelsey spoke with Global News, giving them an emotional interview while holding Megan's pink gloves.
We were friends for 12 years, I guess, ever since I started playing Ringette. We followed each other around like no tomorrow. We were glued hip to hip, and she was my best friend, and I don't know what I'll do without her. Had to get my skull removed, my knee repaired, broke all the bones in my face, my spine, my neck. I can't even explain what she did for me, and having her gloves, I just feel close to her, just having them. Support I've had from my Ringette team. My parents, I don't know if I made them bald, but if I balded them, I'm sorry.
During the interview, Kelsey also wore a pink ball cap bearing her jersey number 3, Megan's number 6, and the phrase, "Yeah, boy," in large letters.
So the "yeah, boy" is a thing that me and Meg did. So you'd go up to someone and be like, "Can I get your longest yeah, boy?" And then they're like, "Yeah, boy," and I say it for as long as I can. So my friend just made these hats for me and Meg and just stuck our numbers on there.
In May of 2017, Lisa spoke to reporters for the first time, opening up to CTV News Calgary about coming to terms with the first Mother's Day without her younger daughter, whose organs were donated after her death.
I have mixed feelings about Mother's Day this year because I'm still happy that I was her mom. I'm still her mom, even if it was only for 17 years. No fear. She was a great Ringette player. She got a lot of penalties, but she got a lot of points. They didn't know who was who. So I actually had to verify that it was Megan when I got to the hospital. She has already given the gift of sight to 2 people from her corneas, heart valves, skin for burn victims. She was the joy of our lives, along with her sister.
Lisa's sister, Megan's Aunt Heather, also spoke, saying,
"The proof was right there. Her funeral, it was standing room only outside. They stopped counting at 750 people.
Although she had previously been deeply involved in Ringette, Kelsey would never have the physical ability to play contact sports again. That didn't stop her, however, from attending a Ringette fundraiser in honor of Megan in July of 2017. The marathon 24-hour Ringette game, dubbed Ring Around the Clock for Megan, was organized by Megan's coach of 4 years, Trevor Hall, whose daughter Alyssa was close friends with Megan. Over 200 players participated, taking the ice by turns over the course of the 24-hour event, which took place at Don Hartman Sportsplex in northeast Calgary. In an interview with Global News at the event, Kelsey said,
I feel empty not having her with me, and I honestly feel dead sometimes. I feel that I'm incomplete without her, so it's hard, but she did complete me. She was my whole, she was my person. I wouldn't even call her a best friend anymore. I kind of would call her my other half or my soulmate. Everything I do now is for Megan. I'm devoting my life to doing it for Megan. I'm living 2 lives now.
Megan's mom, Lisa, also attended the fundraiser, which began at 12:45 p.m. on Saturday, July 8, 2017, and ended at 12:45 on Sunday. Lisa told the reporter,
That first night, seeing Kelsey in the ICU, I felt Megan with her, in her, and I knew Megan would want me to take her as my own. And that's how I feel now, that Kelsey is my daughter. I mean, we were close before, but now she's my everything.
Coach Trevor Hall said,
Megan was a special gal and held a very close place in my heart. I feel honored that this many people have come out to support this. And it doesn't surprise me. We have over 200 on-ice participants this weekend. And I think it's amazing, and it speaks a lot to our community.
All funds raised at the event were dedicated to a scholarship created in Megan's memory by the Western Ringette League. The annual scholarship would be known as the Megan Bomford Memorial Bursary and was created in an effort to pay tribute to her memory and inspire others to continue giving to the sport of ringette.
For us, we feel the loss every hour of every day. We're lonely without her. At least once a year, even 10 years from now or 20 years from now, when she's a distant memory for a lot of people, they're still going to bring up her name every year. And that is the greatest gift we could give her, is just a tribute.
By the end of the fundraiser, over $15,000 had been brought in for the scholarship, which would be awarded each year to a post-secondary student who played with ringette Calgary. According to Coach Hall, the criteria to qualify reflected many of Megan's qualities. She was always the first one to put her hand up to volunteer for stuff. She was a junior coach helping out the younger players, doing that sort of thing. Later that month, in honor of Kelsey's 17th birthday on July 25th and Megan's 18th on July 26th, Lisa arranged a trip to Maui, where they sprinkled some of Megan's ashes. At long last, on Friday, September 8, 2017, nearly 11 months after the deadly crash on McKnight Boulevard, the Calgary Police Service announced that, for the death of Megan Bomford and the nearly fatal injuries suffered by Kelsey Nelson, 52-year-old Shaun Bomford faced multiple charges, including impaired driving causing death, impaired driving causing bodily harm, over 80 causing death, over 80 causing bodily harm, dangerous driving causing death, and dangerous driving causing bodily harm. The over 80 charges reference Shaun's blood alcohol level at the time of the crash, meaning the driver had a blood alcohol level of higher than 0.08, which is more than 80 milligrams of alcohol per 100 milliliters of blood. Lisa spoke to reporters when the announcement of the charges against her ex-husband broke.
Just finally, I've been waiting a long time for this. This is something I never thought I would survive, and I'm still doubtful. It's like your soul dies when your child dies, and half is dead now, and the other half is caring for Sarah, you know. Her 18th birthday was July 26th, so we took some of her ashes to Hawaii, and that was difficult because I was in her bucket list place without her. I wish I didn't have to take my daughter's ashes to Hawaii. I wish she could have gone. Relief that finally the truth is out there. You know, we can hopefully see some justice for Megan and Kelsey, what happened. She just texted me the whole time that she had left my house to the accident time. Just that he was driving erratically, he was aggressive, he was angry, he was going to cause an accident, and that her seatbelt was still broken. After I left him, I know that Sarah and Megan were trying to get him help. Megan mostly, but you know, she was fighting a losing battle because she couldn't force him into treatment, and she honestly wanted to. It's just something that we always have to be aware of. You know, it doesn't matter what season it is, it doesn't matter what time of day it is. You know, drunk drivers are out there driving drunk every day of the week and at all times. Unfortunately, Megan paid that price.
Megan's close friend, Dana Hughes, told a reporter,
I just want her to know that we're all fighting for her and we're not going to forget her, and you know, we live by her every day and her legacy, and that's all we're trying to do.
Regarding what seemed from the outside to be a lengthy investigation, Sergeant Colin Foster of the Calgary Police Service Traffic Section said during a news conference,
So this is actually quite a complicated investigation. We had no witnesses who were actually able to identify who the driver was, as everybody was ejected from the vehicle.
Sergeant Foster added, The injuries were very serious, so we had to wait before all parties were fit enough for us to be able to talk to them.
The family have been great. They've been very patient with us. Obviously, it's been quite some time since this collision before charges have been laid. There were, as I've alluded to, there were some complications in this investigation. They've been very patient. They've been very understanding. But also they're very pleased that now they've got some sort of closure, and the fact that Bomford has been charged and they can start to move on with that process.
With all the video conferencing and virtual meetings going on these days, we all want to look our best. If you're like me, you're probably confused by all the different methods of teeth whitening on the market. Now that I'm partnering with Smile Brilliant, I've learned a few things that you might find helpful about home teeth whitening methods. For example, LED lights are a novelty item. Whitening strips neglect the gum lines, crevices, and molars. Charcoal is abrasive and wears down your enamel. And whitening toothpaste only works on surface stains. So if none of these miracle products really works, what does? The number one product recommended by dentists is the custom-fitted tray, which usually costs an arm and a leg because they require a dentist to make them by hand using a model of your teeth. With Smile Brilliant's Lab Direct process, you can get custom-fitted teeth whitening trays at a fraction of the price without a single visit to the dentist. Using an exact model of your teeth, Smile Brilliant's lab technicians will handcraft your trays to give you the best possible whitening results. All you have to do is visit smilebrilliant.com, and when you order their system, make sure you use the coupon code CHILDREN at checkout for 30% off. When you receive the package from Smile Brilliant, it's really simple. You just make your dental impressions at home and return them using the prepaid envelope they provide you. In a matter of 1 week, Smile Brilliant will have your trays back in the mail. Now, Smile Brilliant has something brand new to check out. On their website, you can also pick up a Carry Pro ultrasonic electric toothbrush. This toothbrush is powerful, with 40,000 vibrations per minute, 5 brush modes, and 1 full battery charge lasts 30 days. Check out the deluxe, individual, and couples packages for the Carry Pro electric toothbrush. Using my coupon code, CHILDREN, means you're supporting me while saving a huge amount of money. So check out smilebrilliant.com today. Although in the months before Shaun was charged, rumors swirled of alcohol being a factor in the crash, very few people who knew the family could believe that Shaun would purposely endanger his daughter and her best friend in that way. He was an upstanding guy who seemed like a devoted father. Everyone knew he put 110% into coaching his daughter's ringette team throughout the years, and he was widely known as a gregarious jokester, the life of the party. How could such a likable guy possibly take such an egregious risk or be so reckless with his daughter's life? Even after he was charged, many continued to support Shaun, saying no punishment he could receive from the court could be worse than knowing he was responsible for his own daughter's death. Some could not accept that Shaun's choice to drink and drive with 2 teenagers in the car qualified his actions as criminal. What very few knew was the man behind the mask, the real Michael Shaun Bomford, the man who spent the better part of 2 decades terrorizing his family behind closed doors. Everyone knew Shaun, the fun guy, the great dad, the talented musician, the hard-working coach. Only those closest to him knew Shaun, the sharp-tongued, vicious drunk who targeted his wife and daughter inside their home because they dared speak up against him, begging him to quit drinking. Lisa's story will undoubtedly sound hauntingly familiar to anyone who survived a relationship involving narcissistic abuse. When Lisa and Shaun first married, things seemed fine for the first little while. Shaun was close with his family, and as time went on, they regaled Lisa with many zany tales of Shaun's hilarious escapades while drunk. The whole family had a history of careless behavior involving alcohol, including driving drunk, doing stupid things, and covering for each other, ensuring no one was ever held accountable for their own reckless actions. By the time Lisa realized she had made a huge mistake, she already had 2 children with Shaun, whose bad behavior had escalated into domestic abuse. His drinking snowballed after Megan was born, and his anger was becoming a major problem in their home. He drank enough to make a significant dent in the couple's finances, and he drank so often that Lisa began questioning his ability to care for their young daughters while she worked. Over time, as Shaun settled into a pattern of verbal, emotional, and physical abuse against his wife, he made a habit of telling Lisa that if she ever tried to take his children from him, he would have her killed and her body would never be found. Alone, over 2,000 miles from her family and friends, and in fear for her life if she tried to stand up for herself or leave, Lisa focused instead on keeping herself and her children alive and doing her best to mitigate the trauma Shaun piled on the 3 of them. When Shaun physically abused Lisa, he never left a mark, both because he never wanted her to have proof, and because he cared too much about how he was perceived by others. Even more so than with physical violence, he used coercive control to keep Lisa and their daughters under his thumb. Lisa was not allowed to express an opinion lest she be belittled, mocked, or dismissed. If she dared stand up to him, he gaslighted her, making her question her judgment and her sanity. He criticized everything she said and did, but the slightest criticism directed at him, no matter how gently delivered, would send him into a rage. Eventually, Shaun's drinking escalated to the point that he was throwing back a 40 of rye whiskey every 1 or 2 days. What many people don't understand about high-functioning alcoholics is that despite drinking enough alcohol to render the average person unconscious or even dead, the functional alcoholic may appear normal, even sober. They have a higher tolerance for alcohol than most people, which means they have to drink a lot more than most people would for signs of intoxication to become apparent. As the girls grew older, Shaun's drinking only worsened. Although the world at large saw him as a wonderful, devoted father who stayed very involved in his daughter's sport, he even began showing up at the rink under the influence. Shaun grew increasingly angry and violent, verbally abusing both Lisa and Megan. Sarah, however, was his golden child. She was quiet, obedient, and non-confrontational, where both Lisa and Megan often tried to convince him he had a problem, begging him to seek help, which only seemed to make things worse. Lisa repeatedly asked Shaun's family for help, but everywhere she turned, no one believed the dynamic within the family could possibly be that bad. That's a common complaint among victims of psychological abuse. We've gotten so good at hiding the fact that there's a problem that when we do finally get the courage to tell someone, they don't believe us. By 2012, the girls were old enough to have their own cell phones, meaning they always had a way to contact someone if they needed to. Lisa's family had moved to Calgary after her younger sister, Heather, was diagnosed with cancer, so Lisa finally had family nearby to support her. She finally gathered the courage to tell Shaun their relationship was over. Because of major floods in Calgary at the time, however, it was impossible to find a rental home, so Lisa was forced to continue sharing the family home with him. For the rest of the girls' school year, Lisa and Shaun alternated weeks in the house, staying at their respective parents' homes on their off weeks so the girls didn't experience an interruption in their routine. When Lisa was out of the home, either at work or with her family, Shaun burned many of her belongings, including a large number of family photos. At last, Lisa was able to move out in October of 2013. By this time, Megan was having issues at school, and even more concerningly, she had begun cutting herself and even attempting suicide. She was admitted multiple times to the hospital for mental health issues. Sarah, too, was suffering, although she didn't express her depression and anxiety until after Lisa left Shaun. Sarah rarely saw her father after the physical separation, choosing to live with Lisa. Megan spent more time with Shaun at first because of his involvement with Ringette, although in the last year and a half of her life, Megan stayed more often at Lisa's apartment. One reason was that her high school was closer to her mom's place, but another was that her father's hostility continued increasing. He punched holes in walls, and on one memorable occasion, he threatened one of Megan's friends with a knife. It would appear the mask was beginning to slip. Just 2 months before her death, Megan retweeted a quote that read, "It's increasingly clear that for men, being drunk excuses anything they do." On October 18, 2016, Lisa and Megan attended an appointment at the high school with Megan's principal and guidance counselor. At that point, Megan had been absent so much that she had fallen far behind the rest of her class, and the meeting was organized to come up with a plan to get her back on track to graduate with her friends in June. It was an emotional meeting. Megan was in tears, and her mom held her and assured her they would do whatever it took and whatever she needed. When the two left the school, Lisa caved in to Megan's request to pick up McDonald's before they returned home. Megan finished one cheeseburger, leaving her second one in the fridge, where it remained for days, as Lisa described it, a testament to her unfinished life. Lisa didn't realize Megan had made plans for her father to pick her up, until Megan asked for her birth certificate, which she needed to get a criminal background check as part of the process to become a junior ringette coach. Almost as soon as Megan left, she began texting Lisa, complaining that Shaun was in a bad mood, annoyed about having to drive Megan and Kelsey to the police station, yelling at Megan and calling her names. Lisa instantly grew concerned as Megan described her father raging and driving like a lunatic, especially with the knowledge that the passenger side seatbelt in Shaun's recently purchased vehicle was non-functional. Megan expressed her fear through one final text message to her mother at 4:44 p.m. that Shaun was going to cause an accident while she was stuck with a broken seatbelt. It was the last text Lisa ever received from her younger daughter. Lisa was sitting at the table, waiting to hear back from Megan, when she received a call from Kelsey's mother. "Lisa, there's been an accident." In the 2 years between Shaun being charged and the trial, according to both Lisa and Sarah, he repeatedly promised his surviving daughter that he would do the right thing. He would take responsibility for Megan's death by pleading guilty to the charges. Three full years after Megan's death, on December 2, 2019, opening statements began in the trial of 54-year-old Michael Shaun Bomford, over which Court of Queen's Bench Justice Christine Eidsvik presided alone, meaning there was no jury present. Shaun, who was free on bail during the trial, pleaded not guilty to all of the charges against him. He entered the courtroom using a cane, walking with a pronounced limp left over from his severe injuries. During his opening statement, Prosecutor Scott Wilson told the court that the Crown would present evidence showing Shaun's blood alcohol level was 3 times the legal limit at the time of the crash, and that he was driving more than 30 kilometers per hour over the speed limit when he lost control of his Jeep Liberty on October 18, 2016. Wilson also promised the court he would present evidence about text messages Megan sent her mother in the minutes before the rollover, describing in detail what was going on inside the vehicle. He said the crash had profound and tragic consequences, including Kelsey's serious brain injury, which left her with no memory of the events leading up to the incident or the incident itself. The defense's opening statement made it clear that Shaun and his attorney intended to cast doubt over the case by suggesting that one of the girls, not he, was driving when the crash occurred. Never mind the promises Shaun had made to his daughter Sarah over the past 2 years. Never mind his claim that he wanted to do the right thing. At this point, he was all about saving his own ass, but to the people who knew him best, that was nothing new. A man named Adam Bickerstaff took the stand early on, testifying that he was one of the first to stop at the scene of the accident. While providing life-saving aid to Kelsey, he testified, he comforted the young girl, who struggled to breathe. "We told her she was loved, and we were going to help her. We said we loved her, and people were on their way to help." Also among the first witnesses called by the prosecution were Nurse Jan Ginther and her firefighter husband Kurt, who had seen the Jeep rolling across the road and stopped their pickup truck to render aid. During Jan's testimony on the first afternoon of the trial, she described picking her husband up at the airport and traveling east on McKnight Boulevard on the afternoon of October 18th when she saw an SUV from the westbound lanes lose control. "When it came across the median, it was launched in the air and started to spin like a corkscrew. The Jeep hit the pavement," she said, and went airborne again. "That's when we saw the ejection of 3 bodies. When it was in the air, 3 bodies were ejected." When asked by Crown Prosecutor Trevor Fick if she had seen where the 3 people were sitting inside the Jeep before they were ejected, she said she did not, and she was unable to determine which person was driving. Jan wept on the stand as she recalled her husband checking on the girl who had come to rest in the middle of the road. "Kurt said that Megan was gone, but being the nurse, I wanted to double-check. I pulled back Megan's hoodie, and what I saw indicated to me that there was nothing that could be done for Megan." Jan told the court that her husband attended to Shaun while she assisted Kelsey where she lay on the grassy embankment, bleeding from her head. "Sitting there with her, I held her hand, and she squeezed my hand, and she gasped and she gurgled, and I knew she was alive." Kelsey, Jan testified, was choking on her own blood, so she needed to be moved. Jan held Kelsey's head between her knees, pulling her jaw forward to open Kelsey's airway and scooping blood from Kelsey's mouth to allow her to breathe. While Jan testified to the gruesome scene, Shaun sat in the prisoner's box, sobbing. Kurt Ginther testified about assisting Shaun, saying that at first the man was unresponsive and did not appear to have a pulse. When Kurt returned to his side moments later, he saw that Shaun had begun breathing, and he was lying in a ball on his side, crying. On cross-examination, defense lawyer James Wyman grilled Kurt about the time he spent rendering aid to Shaun. Kurt testified that although he spent several minutes with Shaun, he did not detect the smell of alcohol on the man's breath. Both Jan and Kurt testified that Shaun was prematurely declared dead despite their insistence that he wasn't. When Kurt saw that a blanket had been placed over Shaun, he told EMS, "No, he's not dead," but the blanket covered Shaun for 5 to 10 minutes until someone saw him moving. On the second day of the trial, December 3, 2019, several first responders, including firefighters and paramedics, testified about the chaos at the scene of the crash. Alberta Health Services Advanced Care paramedic Darcy Elder testified that in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, while ventilating Shaun, "I noticed the smell of alcohol almost immediately. I was positioned at the head and concluded the alcohol odor was coming from the patient's mouth and or nose." Paramedic Jan Rozak told the court that after Shaun had been coated black, meaning he was thought to be dead, someone realized he was alive. Kneeling next to the man, the paramedic pulled back the gray blanket covering Shaun and was blasted with a strong, pungent odor of an alcohol-like substance. David Campbell, who was also referred to as Scott Campbell in some articles, a member of the Calgary Fire Department, testified that when Shaun was loaded into the ambulance, the alcohol smell quickly filled the enclosed space. David was the first responder who initially assessed Shaun and, unable to find a pulse, covered him with a blanket. He testified, "He was a non-viable patient." On Tuesday afternoon, Megan's mom, Lisa, testified via CCTV, telling the court that Megan sent her multiple rapid-fire text messages between the time Shaun picked her up until the time of the crash. One such message was a screenshot of an impatient text Shaun had sent Megan when he arrived to pick her up, which read, "I'm here, 1 minute and I'm gone." Another message placed Shaun behind the wheel of the Jeep when Megan said, "It's such an inconvenience that he has to drive me and Kelsey to the police station." Lisa told the court there was no way Megan would have been driving while sending her dozens of text messages, saying Megan was strongly against texting while driving. "She would certainly raise her voice when I was driving if I would even look at my phone. She would say, 'I don't think so. I don't want to die today.'" Defense attorney James Wyman tried to cast doubt on Lisa's testimony by questioning her about her acrimonious divorce from Shaun. At one point, Wyman asked Lisa, "You believe my client's responsible for this accident, isn't that correct?" Lisa replied, "Megan certainly isn't, and yes, I do." Other than her testimony, Lisa did not attend the trial, nor did Sarah. Neither wanted to subject themselves to the experience. Lisa's sister, Heather, attended on behalf of the family. Kelsey herself attended most of the trial, although due to her brain injury, she was not called to testify as she did not remember the day of the crash. The admissibility of the text messages was hotly disputed between the defense and the prosecution, as they were the linchpin of the Crown's case. Prosecutor Wilson said, "The only way we can determine who was driving is by looking at the text messages." That afternoon, the trial entered voir dire to determine the admissibility of the text messages into evidence. Judge Eidsvik later admitted the messages. Also during the trial, an expert testified that Shaun's blood alcohol at the hospital was measured at a minimum of 226 milligrams of alcohol per 100 milliliters of blood, which equals a BAC of 0.226. That's almost 3 times the legal limit of 0.08. An accident reconstruction expert also testified that the Jeep was traveling 112 kilometers per hour at the time of the crash, despite the area's speed limit of 80. A mechanical expert testified there was no evidence of pre-existing damage to the Jeep, and he tested the accelerator after the fact and found it to be in working order. During closing arguments at the end of the day, defense lawyer Wyman argued that Megan's text messages did not prove Shaun was driving when the crash occurred, saying the 6-minute gap between the last text and the crash meant Shaun's culpability couldn't be proven. "None of us were there. We can't say he was driving at the time of the collision." As for whether Megan or Kelsey, both of whom had learner's licenses, could have been driving when the vehicle rolled, Wyman said, "It's not outside the realm of possibility." During the prosecution's closing arguments, Prosecutor Wilson told the court they would not seek convictions on Shaun's 2 impaired driving charges, as the evidence could not prove his impairment caused the crash, but they would seek convictions on the other 4 charges. At the end of the 2-day trial, Justice Eidsvik told the courtroom she would make her decision the following month. In late January of 2020, Justice Eidsvik reconvened the court to announce her verdict. At the hearing on January 24th, she said she considered all of the evidence, including Megan's text messages and the erratic driving seen by witnesses consistent with a drunk driver, in determining the Crown has proven Mr. Bomford was driving the Jeep when the collision occurred. Erratic swerving and excessive speed is consistent with a driver who is impaired by alcohol, the judge said, adding that the defense's suggestion that Shaun may have pulled over on the way to the police station to allow one of the girls to drive was pure and unreasonable speculation. As for the verdict itself, I'll quote directly from the judge's oral reasons for judgment, as published by the Canadian Legal Information Institute. At the outset of the argument, the Crown advised the court that it was not seeking convictions on counts 1 and 2. Accordingly, those impaired driving counts are dismissed. As a result of my findings, all of the elements of the remaining counts against you, Mr. Bomford, have been proven beyond a reasonable doubt by the Crown. Accordingly, more specifically, I find you guilty of counts 3 and 4. While driving a vehicle with blood alcohol exceeding 0.08 milligrams per milliliter, he did cause an accident resulting in the death of Megan Bomford and bodily injury to Kelsey Nelson, and guilty of counts 5 and 6, operating a vehicle in a manner that was dangerous to the public and caused the death of Megan Bomford and bodily injury to Kelsey Nelson. As the verdict was read, sounds of relief were heard from friends and family of Megan in the gallery. After the hearing, Megan's aunt, Heather Cooper, spoke to reporters outside the courtroom.
It's been difficult for all of our families to see and hear things that were being said, and so it was incredibly validating to be able to sit there and see her say those words of guilty. It's difficult that a parent wouldn't take responsibility for their actions and would instead blame their child for this. We are just so grateful for those people who stopped and helped and called 911 and stayed with them, held their hands, and said they were loved. As a family, we can finally grieve, not having this hanging over us.
After the verdict, Lisa wrote a statement to CBC News thanking everyone who offered love and support to her family, which helped them cope with the heartbreak of losing Megan. I hope people take the time to check in with those they know who struggle with addictions and the people close to them. Turning a blind eye to these struggles are not solving any problems or making it go away. My children and I tried reaching out for help, and we weren't able to find any support, unfortunately. I hope no one ever has to lose their child at the hands of the other parent again. You should be able to trust they will keep you safe. We will forever keep Megan close in our hearts and advocate for victims of drunk driving. Shaun remained free on bail until his sentencing hearing, which was scheduled for May of 2020, but ultimately took place on Tuesday, August 25th. At the hearing, both of Kelsey's parents were permitted to give victim impact statements. Her mother described the way Kelsey appeared when she came out of her initial surgery after the crash. Her head looked like a pumpkin and was so large and growing. She had a broken neck and back, all her facial bones were broken, her eardrums were blown and bleeding, and she had badly damaged ACL and knee. She had no hair and was missing the right side of her skull and had over 100 staples in her head. Her mouth and body were full of tubes, and she was hooked up to so many machines. Kelsey was on life support. My beautiful daughter was broken into pieces. Kelsey herself addressed Shaun directly, asking, "Will you ever be sorry for what you did? Never did I think you could do something like this to us. I have a brain injury now. I have broken more bones than the years I have lived. My whole life changed. For the rest of my life, I will pay for the consequence of your actions." Kelsey described how one entire side of her skull was removed, stored while her brain healed, and reattached 3 months after the crash. She endured 3 brain surgeries and had to learn how to walk again. An inch of her skull was missing from above both ears. Because her jaw was cracked during the rollover, she still suffered from TMJ issues, and she had a visible indent on her forehead. Because of her injuries, Kelsey said, she could not work, and she was as yet unable to finish high school. The injury to her frontal lobe caused continued issues, including neurofatigue, clumsiness, constant pain, and PTSD. She would need more surgery in the future for her knee pain. Kelsey cried as she talked about Megan, describing how much she missed her best friend, who she never thought she'd have to live without. "You took away my soulmate. I keep telling myself that Megan is coming back, that she is just on a long holiday." Heather Cooper gave a victim impact statement on behalf of Lisa, Sarah, and the rest of the family, describing her niece as vibrant, fun, brilliant, loving, caring, nurturing, loyal, one of the best ringette players in Alberta, and an incredible spirit. She said she was heartbroken that she would never see her niece compete for an Olympic gold medal, marry, or have children because of the selfish actions of her father. Shaun himself also addressed the court, whining and sniveling through his crocodile tears, if you'll pardon my editorialization. "Every day I wish things had gone differently. I wish I could trade my life for Megan's and Kelsey's injuries, but I can't. I wish I could go back and change things." Please take note of the slimy, selfish way he worded that. He didn't apologize for his actions. "I wish things had gone differently" might sound like an apology to a narcissist, for example, but he absolutely avoided taking responsibility for causing the carnage he did. Shaun's blubbering continued, "I can only imagine this is somewhat what hell is like. I wish things were different. I'm sorry. That's all I can say." Even when he explicitly used the words "I'm sorry," he didn't actually apologize for his actions. The only person who ever heard Shaun take responsibility for killing Megan was her sister, Sarah, who Shaun had promised multiple times he would do the right thing and plead guilty, which, of course, he never did. Shaun told the court that Megan was any father's dream daughter, adding, "I miss her every day. I miss the sound of her voice." Heather, who spoke to reporters after the sentencing hearing, had her own opinion of Shaun's statement, saying, "If he was truly sorry, why did he plead not guilty? Why did he put us through nearly 2.5 years of this? This wasn't an accident. This could have been prevented." Justice Eidsvik heard prosecutor Trevor Fick's suggestion that Shaun be sentenced to 7 years in prison, as well as James Wyman's argument for a lesser sentence of 5 years. She then scheduled a hearing to deliver the sentence itself to take place on September 9th, 2020. Yet again, Shaun remained free on bail until he was sentenced. On Wednesday, September 9th, Justice Eidsvik, incredibly, sided with the defense, saying the 7-year sentence sought by the Crown was too high before sentencing Shaun Bomford to 5.5 years in prison. He was barred from driving for 8 years in total, meaning once he was released from prison, he would only have 5 of those years to go, because his license was suspended when he was initially charged in 2017. In her reasons for sentencing judgment, the judge noted that Shaun attended rehabilitation treatment at the Foothills Medical Center and apologized during his submissions. His remorse is genuine. It was noted as well throughout the trial. I guess the judge never considered the possibility that Shaun was crying for himself, not for the daughter he killed. After the sentence was delivered, Megan's Aunt Heather once again spoke to reporters, saying the family had hoped for a longer sentence.
It's lower than we had hoped. We had hoped that the justice would have made more of an example out of this case, that if you drink and drive and kill your child and then plead not guilty and try to pin it on her, that you're going to go to jail for a long time. 5.5 years is going to have to be enough. It's what we got, so we'll take it. But nothing's going to bring Megan back. Every single day without her, she was a light in our family, and it's been extinguished. And we've had turmoil with someone who committed the crime who wouldn't even take responsibility for it, hanging over our heads for these 4 years. And we haven't gotten to focus on Megan, and we haven't gotten to focus on Sarah or Kelsey. And now we can. Now this chapter is closed. It's done. And all I care about is Megan, Kelsey, and Sarah. That's it.
Kelsey, whose injuries left her chronically tired and who could die if she hit her head the wrong way, also spoke to reporters after the hearing.
Meg and I were best friends for 12 years. Shaun has been in my life Michael has been like a father figure in my life since I was young. I hate him. I have never hated someone in this world, but I know what real hate feels like when I look at him. He pleaded not guilty 4 times, I believe. He had been asked, do you plead guilty or not guilty? And he had so many chances to own up to his actions, to take responsibility. So no, his sorry to me it's really nothing. Will I ever get closure? No, Megan's gone. My life has changed. We can never go back. But I think the closure I get today is that there's at least someone out there that has learned that drinking and driving is not a skill. It's not something that you're able to do if you're good at it. Drinking and driving kills people, and people just have to learn that.
In case Shaun Bomford hadn't already proven to the world that he's an utterly heartless approximation of a human being, on Wednesday, January 20th, 2021, he filed an appeal, claiming the trial judge erred by ruling the hearsay text messages admissible at trial, and that his sentence was excessive and unreasonable in the circumstances. Until his appeal is decided by the Alberta Court of Appeal, Shaun will continue serving his sentence at the Drumheller Institution, a prison approximately 133 kilometers northeast of Calgary. As I wrap up this episode, I want to take some time to remember Megan Dawn Bomford as the lively, hilarious, kind, generous, loving person she was. Megan was always smiling and joking and cracking people up with her irreverent sense of humor, her many smiling selfies, and her quest for the longest "yeah, boy" like this one she uttered herself. Yeah, boy! Megan loved furry animals of all types and made friends with them everywhere she went. She loved spending time with her human friends too, and she had many. Growing up in the ringette community, Megan was well known and well loved among her fellow players, their parents, and coaches alike. She also loved hockey, whether she was watching local teams at her age level or professional NHL games. Megan loved watching the TV shows Grey's Anatomy and Glee. Among her favorite musicians were Demi Lovato and Shawn Mendes. She had a crush on actor Evan Peters and a few NHL players too. One last thing I wanted to include was Megan's thoughtful answer to a question posed to her online. How do you keep yourself happy? She replied, "You probably heard it a million times before, but just don't focus on the negatives. There are so many things to be happy about. Sometimes in your life you go through a time when you lose track and can't always see all the things to be happy about, and that's okay. Life is not always going to be a walk in the park, but that doesn't mean there's nothing good in it anymore. Maybe right now you feel alone, sad, tired, angry, upset, and like giving up, but I promise you that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. I am living proof that there's a light at the end of the tunnel. Never give up on yourself. You're going to meet some amazing people and do some amazing things. Spend your time with people who don't suck. Being around negative people will make you negative. Wake up every day with a smile on your face, even if things suck right now, because things will get better. Nothing bad lasts forever. Remember that. Those who love Megan still feel her presence all around them. Whenever a ladybug appears, they know it's Megan stopping by to say hello. Rest well, Megan. You'll never be forgotten. Local news outlets extensively covered the crash on McKnight Boulevard and Shaun Bomford's trial, but what wasn't mentioned in any of that coverage was the story of the years leading up to that final incident, the abuse and manipulation endured by Lisa and her daughters, Shaun's escalating alcoholism and rage, and Lisa's pervasive fear that one day something bad would happen to one or all of them as a result. In next week's episode, you'll hear my interview with Megan's mom, Lisa, and older sister, Sarah, who are ready to tell the rest of the story. These are incredibly strong ladies who will never allow Megan's memory to fade, and I'm honored to help them keep her memory alive. That's it for this week. Join me next week for part 2 of Megan's story. If you like the show, please follow or subscribe to Suffer the Little Children on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, iHeartRadio, Stitcher, or your favorite podcast listening app. And please leave me a 5-star rating and a positive review on your favorite podcast platform. You can also subscribe on YouTube by searching Suffer the Little Children Podcast. Visit the website at sufferthelittlechdrenpod.com, where you can listen to episodes or become a patron for rewards ranging from a shout-out by name on the show to exclusive gifts. Follow the podcast on Facebook, Instagram, Tumblr, and Pinterest at Suffer the Little Children Pod, and on Twitter and TikTok at STLC Pod. View photos related to today's episode on Facebook and Instagram. For more stories like the one you heard today, visit sufferthelittlechdrenblog.com. This podcast is researched, written, hosted, edited, and produced by Lane. Intro theme music is by Dream Note Music, and all music for the show is licensed from audiojungle.net. Email tips, comments, questions, or case suggestions to sufferthelittlechdrenpod@gmail.com. For more information about preventing or reporting child abuse, visit childhelp.org or call your area's child abuse hotline. If you see something, say something. Until next week, bye everyone.